Hi everyone. The response to my first devlog has been both amazing and overwhelming all at the same time. It really means a lot to me that Evie is generating so much interest, and today I'd like to dive a bit deeper into some elements about both character and world design, plus address a few trending questions from the comments in my last devlog, such as why I chose Unity over Unreal. Before I get into all that, I wanted to announce that my Steam page is now live and linked in the description below. So if you like what you see, please consider wishlisting the game. Now let's start with character design. Though this is never outright explained anywhere, the protagonist that the player controls here is the only named character in the entire game. That name, of course, being Evie. She's a representation of my daughter, and the bat creature represents her younger brother. Similar to real life, these video game manifestations are essentially inseparable and have developed a powerful, if unbreakable, bond. I mentioned in the first devlog that a major source of inspiration for this game stems from a period when my son was very sick. He's fully recovered now, but the multi-year journey that he, and by direct association his sister, had to navigate is something that my entire family will be processing for the rest of our lives. Relating back to character design, the protagonist that the player controls is strong and agile, but also compassionate and loyal. The protagonist's flying companion, by comparison, is playful, inquisitive, and eager to prove themselves at all costs. Early on their journey together, Evie and her friend will both encounter an ambiguous life form that attacks their village and everyone in it. All of the villagers, including Evie, are ultimately able to recover from this attack, but Evie's cohort was not so lucky. The village healer is able to heal most wounds, but this one is different and more sinister than the rest. It's not really a wound at all, in fact. The aforementioned ambiguous lifeform is a representation of my son's former illness, which some of you may have already guessed at this point was cancer. Sitting somewhere between Hyperlight Drifter's final boss and a Metroid, this nameless, faceless entity has no remorse and doesn't care who they inflict harm on or how their mere presence impacts not just those touched directly, but literally dozens upon dozens of individuals surrounding the afflicted. This cell-like entity will show up multiple times throughout the story, though rarely will you battle it directly. This again is analogous to real life, where any sick patient's goal is to battle their illness, but oftentimes, and especially with cancer patients, the process and/or medication itself can have serious and immediate health implications. That is to say, intentionally get very sick now, then recover enough to get intentionally sick again, to hopefully kill off the invading cells later. This sums up the core narrative loop of the game, with another influence being Shadow of the Colossus, albeit with a healthy dose of Zelda for overall storytelling and progression. Make your way to a boss, defeat the boss to earn an item or ability, face the consequences of defeating the boss, then do it all over again. Returning to the village healer after defeating a boss is intended to feel heavy on your heart. Each time you make the trip to see the healer, it gets more and more difficult, especially because there are no other options. And while you may trust the healer, you're also likely to hate the process. This hallway is long and lonely. Every time Evie passes through the narrow chamber carrying their dear friend to see the healer, the path gets more and more twisted, cold, and isolating. Once at the end of the hallway, the healer will see you and do what she does to resurrect Evie's companion, which is intentionally brutal, but completely necessary at the same time. The hallway is my interpretation of a unique underground tunnel that linked the cancer clinic to the hospital that my family and I would traverse through after my son would receive his chemo or some other medication so that he could then be sedated, only to have an injection into his spine to prevent the cancer from spreading to his brain. My son's oncologist is truly an amazing person, but watching these procedures never got any easier. Similarly, this dungeon has a visual progression leading all the way to the boss fight. The dungeon itself is linear, and upon entering, it feels like your standard abandoned fortress with crumbling walls and walkways. However, the further you progress, the more aggressive everything becomes, including enemy encounters and even how much the environment is being overtaken with mangled, spiky biomass and appendages. The final room containing the boss encounter is somber and calm, in spite of the intensity of the aesthetics, and this entire fortress progression parallels the emotional journey before beginning a new phase of treatment. Intense buildup and anxiety leading up to the start date, and one day of quiet reflection and calmness, followed by a literal physical battle as the body responds to the foreign medication or procedure intended for healing purposes. Now I'd like to shift gears and answer a relatively common question from my first devlog about why I chose Unity over Unreal. First, I'd like to clarify that I love both game engines, and I actually prefer Unreal for things like content creation, rendering techniques, and even visual scripting via Blueprint. My challenge with Unreal is when you cross over into features like animation blueprints, behavior trees, and other dependencies within the tools. They're all great and definitely serve their purpose as well, but I found that if I took a couple of days off from working on a particular feature within a specific framework, like the aforementioned behavior trees driving the AI, for example, it would take me a while to relearn the tool and begin iterating on the feature again. In Unity, I'm primarily using Playmaker for most of the in-game logic, which includes features like the AI, front-end, HUD, cinematics, and more. This means that if I want to jump back into a feature like the HUD, for example, that I may not have touched in literally months, I don't have to relearn any systems within the engine because I'm just using Playmaker and standard Unity components, exactly the same way I'm doing almost everything else in the entire game. My general guidance when choosing one of these highly capable engines over the other is that if you're a smaller team like 1 to 4 people large, and you don't have any dedicated programming resources, Unity is probably a great option. However, if you're a knowledgeable programmer and don't mind getting your hands dirty, or you have a larger team of 5 or more people to help specialize in a few key areas of development, I wholeheartedly recommend Unreal. For me, it just comes down to the number of systems that need to be mastered in Unreal for optimal results, versus the simplicity of Unity. To caveat this, you can do a lot in Blueprint if you're really savvy, so don't necessarily take my word for it. I've just found my own velocity in Unity is more consistent than my velocity in Unreal, and that matters a lot to me when I'm trying to release this game a year from now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this devlog interesting, and I'm hopeful to see you again in the next one.